Showing Up Strong. Our session today will be on the power of your network. We're really excited for you joining us today, and we have a really great panel to talk about networking. Before we get started, I just want to share a little bit about our leadership sessions that we've been having over the past few months. Kenya, who you'll see and hear from in just a moment, and myself decided that we needed to put together something a little bit formalized to showcase Black women in leadership, talking about different leadership topics. And our goal is really just to motivate, and inspire other leaders, emerging leaders, or experienced leaders, and share some things that can help make us all better leaders. This has been a really great series that we put together. And again, today we're going to be talking about networking. My name is Amy Thompson. I'm the CEO of Creative Allies. We are a digital marketing firm in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we focus on marketing for small businesses primarily, and we also focus on marketing for nonprofit organizations. So I'd like to take just a few moments and let our panelists introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with Stephanie, and if you could share a little bit about what you currently do, but also share about your journey of how you got to where you are.
Oh, sure. And thank you for having me, Amy. My name is Stephanie Austin, and I am the CEO of Black Girl Group. And we are a full service staffing agency that connects men and women of racially diverse backgrounds to companies who are seeking to hire or outsource more diverse talent. And I like to tell people that for me, coming into Black Girl Group was a dream come true. I actually started Black Girl Group after being laid off of my full-time job in public relations. And from there, I literally had a dream that I would one day start this staffing agency that would be able to give more men and women of color an opportunity to have a seat at the table. And so my background is a little bit of PR, it's a little bit of SEO, as Amy knows, a little bit of everything. But right now it's very heavily focused on recruiting and making sure that folks are prepared to enter into the workplace so they can have a seat at the table.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Sonia, if you could introduce yourself and again also share a little bit about your journey.
Happy to. Thank you for having me, Amy. I am the chief executive at Courtroom 5. We make an online support tool for people representing themselves in court. How I got here, I grew up in Durham many decades ago. I'm a PhD electrical engineer. And so I'm not a lawyer. I got into this because I found myself in court without a lawyer. And because I sort of learned fast, I've managed to muddle through that experience. But I saw a lot of people, Black and brown disproportionately, who, like me, couldn't afford a lawyer at the time, but also who had really no hope of getting justice in that system without one. And this is my third entrepreneurial adventure. And so I have a sort of an orientation for solving big problems. And I realized there were a lot of people in that situation and that I had something that I could share. And so I got my business partner, brilliant, is a librarian who had similar experiences. And we just sort of figured out over a lot of time a solution to this problem. And so that's sort of how we came up with Courtroom 5.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And Kenya, if you could do the same, introduce yourself and just share a little bit about your journey.
Absolutely. So I'm Dr. Kenya Odor, and like Amy mentioned, this is also my passion project to elevate the voices of Black women for others to hear. And I, several years ago, left the corporate world where I specialized in roles around user experience, research and design, product strategy, and decided that it was time to partner with organizations rather than being a part of one. And so, in the role that I play, I try to find opportunities for myself and my team to help organizations remove assumptions about their market or their client. So, what do you understand to be the way that your client works with your products or your services today? And how can we validate whether or not, or invalidate those assumptions to make sure that you are solving the right problems and you're solving them in the right way? Um, I have a PhD in human factors psychology and industrial engineering. And my desire to leave corporate America was based on the the confidence that I had in my network. So this is a really timely topic, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Good. Well, thank you so much. And before we jump in, the way that this will work, I'll just ask a few questions and ask each of our panelists to bring their experience and their insights to each of those questions. But before we get started, I do want to share kind of the three objectives that we have for everyone that's watching and listening. But we hope that you'll hear some creative ways that you can expand your own network. We also hope that you'll hear, for many of us who are not natural at networking, you'll find ways to embrace it a little bit more and find ways that work for you. What are some of those better ways of networking? And then tips on how to collaborate with other professionals to expand your network. And that's the goal for this, is that you can walk away with some actionable things in those areas. So to get us started, Sonia, I'm going to start with you. Real basic. How do you define networking?
Define it. Let's see. Networking is really about trying to understand the ecosystem you're playing in, right? And more importantly, understanding your value to that ecosystem. Because whatever you're trying to do, you may be, if I can use a football analogy, you might be the quarterback, but you're not the only player on the field. It's about what we are going to do, the goal, that we are going to make. It's never an individual game that we're playing. And so your network really defines your ability to meet your goals.
That's good. Stephanie, what would you add to that?
I think I would say that to me, networking, my mom describes it best. It's not about who you know, but about who knows you. And so just being able to connect with people and make an impact, try to figure out how you can make a difference in each person's life that you meet. In turn, hopefully they'll be able to come back and pay it forward to you.
Yeah, great. And Kenya, what would you add?
I would like to add, I think that Stephanie and Sonia touched on a lot of what I would define as networking. To add to that, I see networking also, if you visualize a spider web and you're in the center, I envision or visualize networking to be that spider web, and the connections that you have, they then have their connections and they have theirs. And you kind of think about it growing outward and getting larger and bigger, but that network kind of spans different industries or different disciplines and that sort of thing. And that those are all connections of yours, either directly or indirectly.
Good. And so to kind of recap that, there's, finding ways to add value to other people, which I think is extremely important. I'm a believer in this. It's not about who you know, but who knows you, and how you're building those relationships with people so people know what you do and what value you bring. And then, kind of what Kenya was talking about, when you do build your network's network is your network, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that spider web, if you think about that image, everybody that you know knows somebody that you could possibly know just with a quick email, with a quick phone call. So it is really important not just to grow the network, but to understand who is actually in it, 2 and 3 levels deep. And so that's why it's so important, I think, that we have this discussion. The next question that I want to ask, in your experience, when did you realize networking was important? At what point in your career did you say, you know what, I need to spend a little bit more time, or if I were to network more, this is what I would gain from it? And Kenya, I'll start with you on this one.
That's a really good question. I think I realized that networking was a thing. So first of all, I didn't always see it as networking. I just saw it as an opportunity to get to know people. And just by the nature of what I do for work, which is around understanding human beings in the context of what they do in their lives, I am a curious person and like to talk to people in that regard. At some point, I recognized that when you learn more about people and what they do, you realize that there is some connection to them directly or indirectly, or that it may not come about at that time, but that later on, what you learned about them may be useful to you, or you might be of use to them. When I got to a point in my career where I went into leadership and was ready to take on a new challenge, I recognized that networking was important at that point, because I looked back and said, I've established so many relationships over the years in my industry and outside of it that I felt comfortable venturing out on my own, knowing that I could navigate that network and find opportunities.
Good. What about you, Stephanie? When did you realize that networking was important?
I'm gonna say I'm still learning that networking is important. It's an ongoing process for me. For me, I am naturally an introvert, and most people are surprised by that because I do have a background in PR, and I also own a staffing agency. And so, from the outside looking in, people think that I have, an extroverted personality, and I actually don't. And so, for me, networking is actually hard. I can walk into a room, and I'm not gonna be that person who works the entire room at an event. In fact, I'm probably going to stand back and wait for someone to come talk to me just because sometimes just being around so many people, that's a little scary and intimidating for me. And so for me, whenever I show up in a room, I'm always trying to figure out how can I be of service. So I may attend an event, but I may see someone working in catering and saying, hey, can I help you with this plate? Or I'm always trying to figure out like how I can help and how I can be in addition to the room that I'm in. And a lot of times that means playing the background. But what I have learned that even in playing the background and just showing up and being of service, that's also really important because you learn to meet so many people behind the scenes versus trying to meet, the person who's out front. Especially in the industry that I work a lot in, which is entertainment, is oftentimes, people see the glitz and the glamour of being up front, but they never get a chance to meet the person who's behind the camera. For me, because I value not being in the forefront, but I value the background, just being able to step in and realizing that everybody has a role. And like Kenya said, just learning to meet those people who play those different roles and trying to figure out how those pieces come together. So I would say for me, networking being important is something that I'm continuing to learn. But most importantly, when you show up, don't show up to network, but simply just show up trying to figure out how you can be of service.
That's good. That's good. Sonia, how about you?
I think I wouldn't have called it this at the time, but I think I first picked up the value of networking in high school. I've always been really ambitious, and I remember one time I wanted some student government office or something like that. I ran for it, and I lost, and I was shocked because I thought I was the best candidate, right? But to Stephanie's point, it's not who you know or what you want; it's who knows you, right? And so I decided to make sure that people knew me after that and use some what we now understand as networking skills to make that happen. More recently, though, I run a tech startup, and my number one job as CEO is to make sure we don't run out of money, right? Right, as we're trying to solve, figure out the solution to a problem and drive revenue and all that, we need investors. And so one of the things I've had to learn to do over the last few years is fundraising. And no matter who you talk to about fundraising, step number one in the process is to survey your network and understand who you can get to that might have the funding and other resources that you need. And so I've had to learn networking at a whole new level in order to get that done.
Yeah. I think what's important about what you've all said is that networking means a lot of different things, and its use is so broad. I think for me, I always thought networking was about an event, kind of like what Stephanie was talking about, how I wouldn't go, right? You at least went to the event and then shot away. I just wouldn't go. I'd be like, I'm not interested because it would be so overwhelming and terrifying. But for me, when I started to run a business, I realized networking is really about relationships, and it can be one-on-one. It could be 2 or 3 people at a time. It doesn't have to be something so overwhelming at times. So I do think it's also important to recognize that networking isn't just one thing. It's so many different things, like Sonia was saying, the investment part of it. Like there's so many different facets of it. So I appreciate that. One quick poll, I think I can guess the answer to this, but is networking easy or hard for you? Just based on what you talked about quickly, just easy or hard? I mean, for me, it's hard, but.
I think it depends.
I think it's work. It's neither easy or hard. It's just one of those things you have to do.
Yeah, like a journey, just a part of being a good leader, part of being a CEO, etc. Yeah, well, that's good. Okay, let's move into kind of the benefits of networking. So it's one is understanding what it is. 2, it's getting comfortable that it's something you probably have to do if you're going to be successful. But what are some of those benefits that you might get back? And so all of us here are entrepreneurs. Can you share any specific examples of how networking has improved your business or helped your business? I'll start with this one because I want to mention Sonia I met through Kenya. And for me, networking and referrals for your business is huge. And Kenya is somebody that's constantly telling people about my company and then introducing me to other people. And so even without asking or much effort, she's always looking to see, well, who can I connect, right, with Amy or the other people that she knows. And so for me, it's evident how making good connections can help you grow your business, because you might be able to offer something that someone else needs. You might not know them personally, but you could know someone who knows them. And so for me, it's been very obvious in running a business how networking can help. What are some other examples that you all might have? And Sonia, I'll start with you, of how it can benefit you as an entrepreneur.
I mean, you just highlighted one of them, and I would just point out that we are, at this session right here, networking.
Mhm.
Even though we know each other,
Yep.
generally, we're strengthening those connections, strengthening
Yep.
our, ability to offer our services, help others connect with services they need, and all of that. And so I think, I do networking now just as a basic part of my job. There are partnerships we need to develop. There are investors, there are employees we need to hire. There's so many, needs that we have that are going to depend on our ability to reach people. And so the larger the reach, the more options we have. It's all about optionality.
Yeah.
I think in all of our spaces, The other thing I would point out in terms of a benefit is that, particularly for entrepreneurs, the space we can operate in is as large as our imagination, right? And the networks that we have really help to spread our imagination, to spread the boundaries of what we can imagine doing, right? And so it's just, so that's one of the biggest benefits for me, is to help me envision, hey, I could get from here to there, right? I just have to figure out the route and the
Mm.
people who can connect me with the people who can connect me, and so on. So, I think that's one of the biggest benefits for me, though, is to just help me envision what we can do.
Good. Kenya, what about you?
Yeah, I'm glad you called me next because I wanted to add to what Sonia said. Your ability to envision or imagine the possibilities comes from, for me, networking with people who are very different than you.
Mm.
And although it can be very uncomfortable and intimidating, that connection or that attempt to connect with people that are very different helps to open your mind to different ideas, opportunities, perspectives, and that can only help you grow. Early on, someone said to me when I first ventured out on my own that when you talk to people, you want to end the conversation by saying, "How can I help you?" So when you go into networking without motives or without the intention to selfishly gain something, and that you truly listen to that other person that you're meeting and networking with, a lot of value can come out of that connection and that conversation. And the person on the receiving end can feel that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think those are two excellent points. The diversity is important because most human beings, we do things that are natural. So we go where we're used to going. We talk to people we're used to talking with, and so pointing that out, that trying to make your network of people who are different from you, I think that's really important. And then the other thing that you talked about, that just not being limited, being able, both of you talked about this, but being able to really envision, it goes back a little bit to that spider web, like who are all the people over here that can
Mhm.
help me get to here. Like that is really important, that your network helps you not to limit yourself. So that's, I think that's really good. Stephanie, anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, so this would specifically be helpful to any college students who may be listening in. Is that for me, I when I was in college, I like to say I was a professional intern. I was in college for 4 years, but somehow I managed to have about 10 internships within about 10 different industries. And oftentimes people ask me, like, how did you have time for that? And it was because I did like 2 or 3 at a time. But for me, what I quickly learned as I've gotten older is that there's this quote that says there's 10 years to an overnight success story. And
Mhm.
so when people see someone who's achieved a lot, the first thing that comes to their mind is, oh, wow, they got here overnight, but they don't know about the 10 years plus that it took for them to get to where they are. And so whenever I was in college, like I said, I interned in so many different places. And so now 10 years later, a lot of those relationships are now coming back full circle. And so people will say, oh, well, how do you know so-and-so? And like, oh, I interned for them. And they'll say, oh, why did you intern for so-and-so? I was like, yeah, I interned for them too. And so what happens is that those relationships that I built, I mean, basically as a child, you could say now, are now relationships that have been able to lead me to paid opportunities. And I know, we live in a world where, to say an unpaid internship is almost like a cuss word, because kids are like, I don't want to do an unpaid internship. And I do believe that people should be compensated for the things that they do. But I also think that there's a great art to being able to do unpaid internships and volunteering in those opportunities, because as someone mentioned earlier, Kenya mentioned earlier, showing up with no motives. And so making sure like you're just there to be able to help and be able to serve. And so for me, again, being that unpaid intern, it gave me access to people that, at the time I felt like, I don't know how this person is going to help me. And now 10 years later, it's a paid contract that I'm able to do within my business because they remembered the unpaid work I did as an intern. And so, whether you are a college student or a new grad and you're trying to get your foot in the door specifically in your career or even build your business, I really encourage you to not be afraid to take on volunteer opportunities. Don't be afraid to do an internship, even once, you graduated. I mean, I think it's all about the journey, right? Sometimes we're all trying to figure out, like, how can I win this race right now? But sometimes it's about pacing things out and just fully, enjoying the journey. And sometimes, like I said, it could take 10 years before those relationships that you made actually manifest. But at the end of the day, it's all about starting somewhere. And if you don't start somewhere, you'll never know about the opportunities that could lie ahead.
Yeah. No, that's really great. I think the relationship piece is something that comes through everything that you all are saying, and it's important. I think, Kenya, you were the first person to say this, but making sure that it's reciprocal. And like Stephanie says, not you just figuring out what can you get from this other person, but how can you help them, right? Whether it's ending the conversation or the meeting with, what can I do for you? And I think a lot of times, especially when you're young, you don't have a lot of experience, you will assume there's nothing that you could do for that person. But then, like Stephanie was saying, maybe there's nothing right this minute, but there could be something a couple years, ahead of time where you have a different role. And then they might come back to you and say, hey, remember when we were talking or whatever. And so just keep in mind that it is all about building relationships and identifying where you can help someone else and not just where they can help you. So I think that's really great. Let's talk about collaboration and the role that you feel collaboration plays in networking, and how can or if you have any examples of different ways you've collaborated with people in your network and maybe how that's helped expand your network. Stephanie, we'll keep going with you. Is there anything that you could share on that?
Yeah, I can give an example of our relationship, Amy. Someone introduced the two of us, and so we connected. We didn't really know initially how we would be able to work together, but what we decided to do is that we would check in every single week as entrepreneurs and just brainstorm ideas, brainstorm partnership opportunities. And we do that consistently. And like you said, we share opportunities and we collaborate together on so many projects. And so that's really been helpful too, because I know, specifically as an entrepreneur, and especially as two entrepreneurs who hate networking, ironically enough, it can be lonely sometimes, especially if you don't know a ton of people. So being able to collaborate with other entrepreneurs, especially in this virtual world, has really been helpful, not only to my business, but to me as an individual as well, because it reminds me that even though, I work from home, as many people do, it reminds me that as an entrepreneur, I'm not on this journey alone. And so I highly encourage collaboration. I have a friend who actually says collaboration over competition. And I highly encourage that mindset for all entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Good. Sonia, what about you?
And I think of collaboration as a natural extension of networking, right? So, we all hate going to certain events, right? But it just becomes a part of the job sometimes. And so often if there are people in my network who I know are going to be at a certain event, we'll circle up ahead of time to make sure that we all make the best use of that event, right? Who do you know that I should maybe meet while I'm there, and that sort of thing. Likewise, I think there are some key members of my network, maybe the closest ones, who I have a regular check-in, right?
Mm.
Just to figure out, okay, where are you? How is your network expanded? Are there some people in your network that I should know? And just to do that sort of, it's just networking for
Mhm.
me. But it does turn into just collaboration because of the regularity in it, the frequency in it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Kenya?
To Sonia's point and to Stephanie's point as well, sometimes when you come together and have those regular conversations, you don't go into it knowing where the collaboration or where that conversation is going to take you. And those opportunities can come or kind of formulate over time based on the areas of synergy. Something else I've noticed in myself as I kind of reflect on the dynamic in my relationships when I network is some of us are good at defining and strategizing. Some of us are good at execution. When you connect with someone on a networking level where you have the intent of coming together and joining forces on something collaborative, you want to have conversations that help you to understand who's a strategist and a definer and who's an executor.
Mhm.
Because if you're both strategists, what your ideas you have may never take off. If you're both doers, you may do a lot of stuff without it really having a purpose. And so you want to come together when you're having networking conversations to see what type of dynamic would I have with this person. If you're similar, that's okay. Just know that those conversations need to have that intent, or you need to pull in some other folks in your network that can then help. And it doesn't, one is not better than the other. It's just that we're different. And you want to complement one another in that collaborative engagement.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And it goes back to what you said earlier about making sure your network is diverse and you're not just
Mhm.
networking with people exactly like you, because you can get much farther with some of your ideas if you have some complementary skills. And then I think networking or collaboration being an extension of networking, I think it's important, like Sonia said, that they kind of go hand in hand and you can network in these small groups of people and brainstorm with people, ideate. I honestly, Stephanie, I don't even know how many years it's been since we met, but I actually forgot that it was somebody, I think it was through LinkedIn or something. It was like, you should talk to this person. Okay. And this is way back when we could actually meet in person, so we were lucky that we got a chance to be in person. But our sessions are, I mean, God, we've been meeting every week for years. And we just brainstorm on how to make each other better. We talk about our goals, our business goals, and it's like, where are you? How's it going? That type of thing. So because when you are a CEO, you don't have anybody really that you report to. And so you don't necessarily have anybody that's checking in on you on progress. And obviously, you can do a lot of that yourself, but it is nice to have other people to bounce things off of and keep you accountable. So I think that collaboration piece is important.
Can I can
Let's,
I add some can I add
yes,
something
please.
to that? So we
Yeah.
had another session on mentors, and
Hmm.
I think that networking precedes finding strong mentors
Hmm.
because until you've done the work to network and broaden the people that are you have access to,
Yeah.
you may not be able to find a strong mentor.
Yeah.
And also I want to say that culturally, we are not wired to want to walk up to people we don't know and say, "What do you do?"
Yeah.
That's not typically, especially in the circles within Black culture that I've run in, you don't typically walk up to someone and ask that question. It goes a long way just to ask someone, "What do you do?" And whether someone works with their hands or they're a leader in an organization,
Mhm.
there may be something in that introduction and that connection today or at some point in the future that may come out of it. And you can't assume one way or the other.
Mhm. That's right. Yeah. Um, I want to get into some tactical. This has all been great so far, and I think kind of great insights. But what should people do? What can people start to do right now if they say, okay, I've got to, one, get better at networking, right? So, what are some suggestions or recommendations you have that are things people can do right away? And Kenya, I'll stay with you for a minute. Just some
Okay.
ideas of what people can do.
So I think in line with that, what do you do question, when you go to a public event where you don't know most of the people in the room, but you know a few, say hi to your friends that you know and
Mhm.
politely excuse yourself to go and introduce yourself and talk to people you don't know. Give yourself a goal of, I'm going to connect with or talk to 2 people that I don't know in the room. That'll help you to grow your network incrementally and get
Yeah.
comfortable with talking to people one-on-one.
Yeah. I think that's good. I'm going to give an example. It's not about me, but somebody else that I always talk about. Heather, about, I don't know, 5 years ago, I was at this startup summit, and I was there because we were doing some video work for somebody who was speaking. And she, before the event started, literally was walking around the room, introducing herself to every single person and giving a business card. And at first I was like, who is this woman? And she would just walk up, hi, I'm Heather. And she was like, after we talked, she introduced herself, what she does. And then she was like, I'd love to just meet you for coffee. Okay. Heather and I have been friends for years since then. And we've helped each other, just like Stephanie and I, going back and forth. But her thing was just like you said, Kenya, she was terrified, but she set a goal. And she said, I'm literally going to talk to every person in this room. And she did. And she's able, because so many people don't do that. It's actually kind of surprising. So many people don't introduce themselves to you or don't walk up to you, that when people do, people are more than willing to say, yeah, let's, what's your LinkedIn, or let's connect, or whatever, because it isn't that common. But I always remember how I met her. And like, what guts, to set that kind of ridiculous goal and actually do it. And then I look, 5 years later, I'm still doing business with her. I'm still connecting with her, and she's introduced me to other people. I've introduced her to other people, and it's like, man. So it really does work. You can start small. I don't do it, but it's good advice. Start small with 2, 3 people or whatever, and then just see how over time that network does expand. So I think it's great advice. Sonia, what about you? Tips to kind of get started?
Just a couple things come to mind. I think to Kenya's point, given our cultural orientation and training, it's so important for us to be willing to step outside our own
Yeah.
stuff and to do stuff that's hard, do stuff that's new, And so when you're going to an event with people you don't know, you've got to be willing before you step into the room to be willing to step outside your shell, right? Do what your friend did, commit to meeting everybody in the room, right? Or at least saying hello, just something
Mhm.
small that you haven't done before or that you find uncomfortable, or unfamiliar. Do that thing just to stretch your own boundaries. It's so important to do that. The other thing I would share is that we all have events we can go to where most of the people you won't know, but there are also, and this may be a little easier on ramp to networking, there are also people we don't know in events we go to all the time, right?
Mhm.
That you may not have had a chance to connect with, right? And so, just as an assignment, a first assignment, the next time you're doing something you do all the time, make sure you connect with the people you haven't connected
Yeah.
with before, right? Just to, you're already in a familiar environment. So that's not a challenge for you, right? And that makes it easier if you do that a couple times to go to an event where you don't know most of the people, because at least you're, used to connecting with folks at that point. So just
Yeah.
take those 2 challenges and think of them as challenges. Think of them as opportunities to expand your boundaries. And I'll just say one more thing. I, as an engineer, I don't do people, right? I'll just say, right? I think machines and that sort of thing. And so it's always a challenge for me, really connecting.
Mhm.
Okay. And continues to be a challenge, right? But even though I'm in a very people oriented business, but I'll say that even with that, we all have our particular career or training orientations. You can think about something that your training has prepared you to do and do that with these people, right?
Mm.
So I'm always looking for problems I can solve. And so my approach to people is, what problem do you have today that I can solve?
Yeah.
Right. And that just allows me to get over a hurdle in terms of approaching that person.
Yeah. Good. Stephanie, what about you?
Yeah, so I actually have a funny story. for one, so I'm big on quotes. And so I'm always a big believer, even though sometimes it's hard for me to actually follow it, is to not let the fear of striking out keep you out the game. And like for me, I think that's what scares me about networking is that I'm afraid that I may go up to someone and look crazy, or I may not say the right words. And so that fear kind of stops me. But Amy, you know this. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and she's scared of nothing or no one for that matter. And so she's often teaching me these random life lessons. And I tell people some of my greatest opportunities have come because my daughter has asked something crazy. And so yesterday, we took an impromptu field trip to a flight school by RDU. And we were supposed to just be watching the planes take off. That's it, only watching. And so my daughter sees a pilot and she walks up to him and she said, "Hey, can you give me a tour of your jet?" And I'm just like, "Don't do that. Like, leave that nice man alone." And she was like, "No, mommy, let's just ask him." And I'm like, oh my God. So she asked him and he says, "Oh, sure." And so here we are on a random Tuesday looking at a tour of this private jet. And like for me, I was just like, wow, I can really learn a lot from her because she wasn't afraid of him saying no. She knew if he said no, it was no big to her, big deal to her. Like her life would still go on. But because she said yes, it opened up doors of opportunity for us to be able to experience something that we've never experienced before. And so now that's a new lesson of inspiration for me that I've taken on this week is like, don't be afraid. If someone says no, it's not the end of the world. There's always a yes on the other side of that. And chances are people are going to say yes or look out for you just because you had the nerve to ask. So I say, don't let fear stop you.
Yeah. Well, I can certainly imagine her doing that. She's a very vibrant young lady. But I think that is so important. And like, what Sonia was saying, like take small steps, step outside of your comfort zone, but you don't have to jump, just take like little steps. And yeah, I do think that for the most part, people are much more willing to help, especially what I found in the entrepreneur community here where we are in the Triangle. To my surprise, I was actually really surprised, Stephanie, when you mentioned collaboration instead of competition. I really have seen nothing but people looking out for each other, people looking to collaborate and looking to help. And so that fear is really self-inflicted because I don't think most people's experience would be a harsh no, even if it's a no. It's not going to be a terrible no. And I think in most cases, it'll actually be a yes, or how can I help? Or maybe right now it's not a good time, but follow up with me in a few weeks and let's talk or something like that. But I do find that in the Triangle area, we have a really good group of people who are willing to teach others and help others. And we just have to take advantage of that. People just have to take advantage of that. So I appreciate that. I want to share one thing too, again, not my story, but somebody else's story. But I was introduced to someone who's like super connector, super networker. A couple weeks ago, we met up and he was giving me some tips on networking because I was like, I've got to overcome this and I got to figure this out. And we were probably there for 35, 45 minutes. And we were at a Starbucks. We were sitting at this little table. Every time somebody walked into the Starbucks, he greeted them. He was like, "Hey, how's it going?" Just real quick or whatever. And then he would look at me and say, "I don't know her." And I'm just like, "Well, then why'd you speak?" He was like, "Because people remember how you made them feel." And so, somebody's walking in, maybe they don't have a smile on their face, but somebody greets them, whether it's just a hello, like literally nothing else, not even how you're doing, but just hello. They'll remember you. And like when they see you again, if they ever see you again, they'll remember that was that guy I spoke to. And sometimes they looked at him and they're thinking, "God, do I know him?" Because it makes you think like, do I know him already? It was the funniest thing. And he was like, you've got to find small things that are not hard to do that can really make a difference, make other people feel comfortable around you. And he just gave some great tips, but I'll never forget that. He was like, "I don't know that woman." She was just as happy as could be that he spoke. So I want to close. I think we've touched on everything I'd like to touch on, but I do want to close with some advice. We talked about tools and tips that people could use, but what would be like one piece of advice you could give somebody who, again, is looking to build their network or start? Maybe they're very young, maybe they're a college student or something like that, but they're looking to start their network. What's some good advice maybe someone has given you, but that you would want to share? And Stephanie, I'll start with you.
I'm just going to say, I'm going to give a tip again, because you and I are members of Introverts Anonymous. I will say the biggest step as an introvert that you can take, that I think is the easiest step to take, in terms of networking, is start on social media. Start building those conversations and those networks virtually. And then, take a small leap of faith, and then say, hey, do you want to meet on Zoom? Or hey, do you want to meet in person? And then just begin to cultivate that relationship that way. For me, it is hard for me to just go walk up to a random person and begin a conversation. But social media is kind of like my happy medium. And so if you can start there and build your relationship up from social media and then eventually to an in-person relationship, I think it would be really helpful. But I also think it'll help you kind of shake out some of the nerves that often come attached to, networking when it comes to being an introvert.
Yeah, good. Sonia, what about you? Last advice.
It's the best advice I got, and I'll share on networking, is to think of it as a sales process. Essentially, we are all selling ourselves, no matter what, nonprofits, for profits, jobs, whatever it is. We're always selling something anyway, right? And so that's something that you have to learn. Sales is something you have to learn to succeed. Networking is really just another form of it, right? You're again selling your ability to help people in whatever way you can. And so when you think about it in that way, I think it helps you get over a lot of the social challenges and obstacles that we all experience. So I would just recommend that people think of it as selling your ability to grow your network and your ecosystem.
Good, good. And Kenya?
So if you think about yourself on the receiving end of the question, how can I help? Assume that the person in front of you never asked you that question. But if you had the opportunity to ask them, tell them what you need. So if you can tell someone else, sometimes we assume that we should have all the answers. And if we don't want someone else to know that we don't have all the answers. Take the opportunity to let someone know, even if it has nothing to do with what they do or what they know. Take the opportunity to share with them what's on your mind, what you're looking for, what you're trying to do, where you're stuck. Because sometimes people know other people, and if they can't answer that question for you directly or give you the assistance you need, they may know someone that can. So the more you share with other people, when someone says, how are you? Tell them what's going on, because they may actually be able to help you.
Good. And I'll just add, something that I've learned this year. I mentioned before, I'm not a fan of events, but what I have done is create my own. And so one of the things I would say is find something that you are good at. This series that Kenya and I are doing, I have thoroughly enjoyed it. Who knows how many people are watching, listening, or whatever, but it doesn't matter to me. There's only a couple people right here. We're just having a conversation. But through this, Kenya has introduced me to multiple people that I would have never met outside of that. People who listen, or, Kenya, there's somebody from Greenville that went to our event there, constantly emailing back and forth. And so it's like people, again, back to who knows you versus just who you know. It's so important. And so find something that maybe you're good at that isn't that traditional networking that you can do to kind of get started. Social media, like Stephanie mentioned, I think is important. But for me, I started my own live show, which I never thought I would do. But again, it's just me sitting on this little couch, talking to people one at a time. But you're able to build your network. So even if it's only one at a time or two at a time, that's okay to get started. You can start small, I think, as long as you actually just start. And that's the most important piece. And so anything else that you all would like to share before I wrap up?
My phrase, it seems like that relates to everything, is get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah. For sure.
Sometimes we have to be uncomfortable, and that helps us to get through some of those uncomfortable moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank our panelists today. This has been a great discussion. I think great insights were shared, great tips, and things that you should be able to act on pretty quickly to start to really build your network, develop your network. And so we definitely appreciate everyone's time for joining us. And, like Kenya said, be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And eventually you will get comfortable and then find something else, that you can work on to start with. But I think there's been a lot of great information here. I do want to mention we have another session coming up where we're going to talk about general leadership lessons. This is currently, this is our fourth session. We've talked about branding, personal branding. We've talked about mentorships. We've talked about entrepreneurship, and then today networking. We're going to tie everything together a little bit and just talk about general leadership lessons. That's going to be on October 5th. And you can go to showingupstrongnc.com. You can register there. You can also catch the replays of our previous events, including this one, in case you missed anything. And again, we just appreciate everybody's time and hope to see you soon. Thank you all for being here, panelists, and thank you all for watching.